Welcome to Turn a Page, the official comic book club for Nerd Initiative. Each week, the NI Bullpen will be covering the world of comics, talking to creators, deep diving into some fantastic stories, and much more. Now let's hand it over to the team and turn a page.
Welcome to a very special edition of Turn a Page, the official comic book club for Nerd Initiative. My name is Ken M. You know me as the host of the ODPH podcast. I'm also Nerd Initiative editor-in-chief. To my virtual left, you're right at home. It's in his contract. He has to do his own intro.
I'm at you live and direct from a very disheveled and blurred background at the Sanctum of Awesome. My name's Off the Cuff Tom, Nerd Initiative's pop culture connoisseur. Ken, Connor, always a pleasure.
Indeed. And we have a guest on the line that has a fantastic book coming out June 18th via Boom Studios that has been long overdue, because if you love your fantasy adventures, this has to be in your collection, and it is definitely worth the hype and the wait for it, because it's been since 2021 that we have dived into this fantastic universe to finally get the sequel to The Last Witch, which we now finally have with The Last Witch, Blood and Betrayal #1. And we are super excited to talk to this author about that book and a few other things going on. So you know his work from such books as Assassin's Creed, Sherlock Holmes versus Harry Houdini, Kill Shakespeare, but you definitely want to know him from The Last Witch. Please give it up for the one and only CONOR McCREERY. Connor, what is going on?
Oh, thank you guys so much. That is probably one of the nicer introductions I have got in my life. So thank you. I am just sitting
we can
here.
do it again and make it worse.
His beard is disheveled, the hairline's receding.
Oh my God.
He likes the Toronto Maple Leafs, so he's continually sad and beaten down. I know we went there early, Tom. I apologize.
That's all right. I'm a Flyers guy, so that's on me. I'm the Broad Street Bullies.
I was going to say, Tom's a Flyers guy. I'm a Rangers guy. I mean, right now this season.
Wow. A Rangers guy and a Flyers guy are like
that's why we're faraway studio. Yeah, that's what I say. So we can always hit the off button if we need to.
Man, you guys should just be parachuted down to any peace process that's needed. Because if you guys can make it work, then we can all make it work.
Indeed. Yes, it's the synergy that works, and it's the clashing of styles that comes across here. And this is one that, like we said, in comparison to where we're going with The Last Witch, this story has so many elements involved, no pun intended, but it is one that really kind of transcends the young adult reader market and really kind of stands on its own. So in case anybody's not familiar about it, Connor, let's break down a little bit of what The Last Witch is all about.
Sure. I mean, if we're going to do the tongue-in-cheek pitch, I like to say that The Last Witch is Irish Avatar: The Last Airbender with just the right amount of child cannibalism. And it's for kids. What it is a, like you said, is a fantasy adventure story. It's about a 12-year-old girl named Saoirse. It's set in medieval Ireland. She finds out that she can use magic. Hooray! Except she finds that out because a coven of witches destroys her village, leaving only her bratty little brother, and her cigar-smoking grandmother alive to try to stop this coven from opening a door that will destroy the world. And so it is meant to be, kind of classic Irish fairy tales, but it's also really inspired by things that scared me when I was a kid. Stuff like The Secret of Nim or The Dark Crystal. Those were stories that I loved, but when I was younger, they were intense. I remember watching The Secret of Nim and thinking, I'm not sure if it's going to be okay. I'm not sure if, like Miss Prisby, if she's gonna win. And those stories really stuck with me. Those were the stories that really kind of drove my creativity, made me want to do what I do for a living. And I've got 3 kids, and so I started The Last Witch. It came out in 2021, so I kind of started it probably 2020. It moved pretty quickly, actually. And so, my 2 oldest were like 4 and 6. And so, being the wonderful father I am, I was like, how can I come up with a story that will scare the bejesus out of them? And so, I wanted to tell a story that I thought young children would really, relatively young children would really relate to. But also, as a dad, I wanted something that I was excited to read and to tell them. And I think that's what the best all ages, work does. Is It's amazing. Kids, it sticks with them. It kind of shapes them in some ways, But as an adult, you're still like, this is just good storytelling. And so I really appreciate, that intro talking about this is not just for younger readers. This is for anybody who loves a good fairy tale.
Yeah, because the first time I picked it up, I was just blown away by it. Because, like I say, it's very deceptive of how many layers it is to it. And the one thing that I really like is, yeah, I don't feel this is for kids. Like, this is so all ages, like to the purest intent, that there is something that no matter what your age group or demographic is, you're going to find something in it that you really get hooked on. And once you go, like, really deep diving into the story, by the time you get to the end, you're like, wait, what? And to get that reaction out of a book, I think is probably one of the highest compliments you can get, because if you can get that connection with the reader on that level, you've done the job.
Is the art
Thank you.
style
I
with it
mean,
is deceptively, it's deceptive in a good way. Like you're looking at it and it looks like, oh, hey, this is going to be a very nice, fun, easy read just looking at it off the shelf. But by the time you get to the end, it's like, oh, ah, you know what I mean? Yeah, you did the job.
well, no, thank you. I mean, that's like, so V Glass, who's the artist in the book, as somebody else was telling me not too long ago, they're like, it's really interesting because they're like, it feels like a Disney book in that they're, the character designs are relatively clean. The facial expressions work really, like the acting in the book works really well because these characters are very simplistic is the wrong word, but they're not, they are more on the simple side. But then you look at like the work they did in terms of like the backgrounds and the fact of like I love building story. Like I love building story world. And so Kill Shakespeare is kind of the first chance I got an opportunity to do that. And Andy Belanger, who the artist on that, really drove home to me that when you're going to try to create a world, you need an artist who's willing to dive in and visually create that world. And so one of the things you notice in the Last Switch is V Glass, there's not a lot of these like blank panels behind. There are always details. Like when you go in the first issue, not to give too much away, the beginning of the story is our main character, Saoirse. She is an outcast. She wants people to see her as special. She hates the fact that her and her family are kind of on the edge of this village and nobody really cares about them. And so she wants to go on this quest. There's this one boy in town who's kind of her friend. He's a bit of an outcast too, so it's kind of like neither of us have anybody else. And they make this stupid bet to go beyond the hedge at the end of the village, deep into the forest, to grab a piece of rubble or something else to prove that they've gone to this crumbling tower that apparently is a witch's tower. The problem is this is the one day of the year that you cannot go outside, because in Irish mythology they have a Groundhog Day as well, except because it's Irish mythology, it is not a cute rodent. It is a witch that is going to eat children if the witch finds them. And so Saoirse goes on this quest to get to this tower, which she doesn't really believe there's any witches. She doesn't believe those stories. And of course, because this is a fairy tale, she's unfortunately very much wrong about that. And I
Right.
bring all that up to say that, like, when you first get that first image of Saoirse and this other little kid getting ready to go into the woods, V has drawn this just immaculate forest. Like there's 100+ trees in this forest. And I feel like that's the key. And that's what makes V's work so amazing, is on one hand, you have these very accessible, very like bare bone kind of designs for the main characters. And then when V goes in there and builds the background and anytime we go to a new location, the work they do to make the location just feel like you could step into it is just awe-inspiring. I mean, I think I wrote a really good story, but V's work, to me, like that's the star of the book. Is you turn to any page in The Last Witch and you're going to see something that's going to make you go, wow, this book looks amazing.
Fully agree. It's so deceptive how detailed it is. But that's one thing that is one of the elements that really sucks you in to the story. And there's just something, it's so simplistic in its presentation, but there's so much more to it. And like I say, for readers that really want something to really kind of gravitate towards, this is a perfect book for it.
Yeah. Now, speaking of the characters, it's been since 2021 since we dabbled into the world with Sorsha, Brahm, Hugh, and then, how soon did we have the next chapter, starting to get talked about?
So this book is the weirdest book of my career. So when
Can we put that as a
I'll
quote
take a
on the
rip.
book?
Yeah, seriously, right? So we'll start off. So normally when I pitch books, you go to your editor or whoever you're chatting to and you pitch them like a couple of paragraphs, right? Because they've only got so much time. But then you have like a big document just waiting. So if they say, hey, do you have more? You're like, oh, sure. And you fire them this thing and they're like, wow, you've thought about it. This is a great book. The Last Witch was actually based on a short story I put into a charity book years and years ago called Fears and Fables. It was a charity book in the East Coast Canada. And it was just this first little story about a girl who goes past the hedge and finds a witch's tower and finds a witch. And it had the little brother. And in the first book, there is a bird that kind of Saoirse helps, and then the bird kind of helps her later. And that's all there was. But I kind of liked the idea. I thought it was just a neat opening. I just didn't know what to do with it. And so I put this little paragraph into these set of paragraphs I sent to Boom. And I think I probably said, oh, her brother and her grandmother's going to help her, because I'm like, there's got to be an adult involved. And I was like, and there's a big twist. And that's all I had. And so Boom went through whatever the 5 or 6 things I sent. All of the rest again had full pitches ready to go. And it was a Friday late afternoon, because the time difference, East Coast versus West Coast. And they're like, oh, we really like this witch story. We're really excited about it. We know it's a little late for you now, but if you could just flip us the pitch document on Monday, that would be great. You have one, right? And I'm like, oh yeah, of course I have one. I had nothing. And so that weekend I dove through and tried to figure it out. And the whole story came to me. I looked back and I'm like, oh man, like you were on fire that weekend. And so I brought them the book, and the original plan was it was going to be one big graphic novel. So the whole thing was written. And then COVID happens. And they're like, we don't quite know how to play this, right? It was the early days of COVID. No, in retrospect, it was good for the comics industry because people were buying comics because we had nothing else to do. But when it started, they weren't sure. So they're like, well, we can't do this one big, thick graphic novel. So I think it was like 250 pages I wrote or whatever. And they're like, we're not sure if it's going to work or not. We got to do something smaller. And so we cut the book in half, but now you've got 225-page books. And they're like, well, that's not enough. We need to do at least 150 per trade. So they're like, it's like catnip to an author. Would you like to write more? Yes, I would. And so it went from being one graphic novel to 2 graphic novels. And then about 3 or 4 months, like just in time for solicits, they're like, we're not going to do the first graphic novel. I'm like, what do you mean? They're like, we're going to do them as single issues, because we just did this thing with Wind, where we released these oversized singles and the market went crazy for them. And so that's what we did with The Last Witch. So the whole book was actually written by the time issue 1 came out, right? Because I went back and I fleshed it out. And so we're going through the process, and the first 5 issues come out. I think it set records for Boombox, for sales for the book. And for whatever reason, the bookstore market, it just didn't. Comic shops loved it. The bookstore didn't quite know what to do with it. And so we get to the end of the first book, but it's just the first half of one larger book. And Boom's like, we don't know what we can do going forward. We're not 100% sure we can keep doing this. And so I was just gutted, right? I was like, oh my gosh, like, it always sucks when something doesn't go as far as you want, but for that one especially, because it ends right in the middle of the story. It's not a proper ending. And here's what's so amazing about V Glass and Natalia Nestrenko, who's the colorist, and Jim Campbell, who's the letterer, and now Taylor Esposito. Without us knowing if Boom was going to continue the series, even though Boom had sent really good, Boom wanted to do it, but there was just, it's after COVID. There's a whole bunch of things are happening in the comics industry. And I had the script. V drew it, not knowing where it was going to go. Natalia colored it, not knowing where it was going to go. Jim Campbell couldn't letter it because he just didn't have the space, but he helped me find someone, and he gave him the whole style guide, and he sat down with him and was like, this is how you want to letter this book, right? Like, this is, from my perspective. And so like the whole creative team finished the book while we were just sitting there, not knowing where the heck it's going to go, right? And so that was probably the coolest professional moment of my career. And also, it makes you feel good. You're like, wow, we've created something together that everybody in the team was like, we have to finish it because it's worth finishing. And it's going to end up somewhere. We don't know where, but it's going to end up somewhere. And then, of course, in the fullness of time, Boom was able to come back and say, hey, have you done anything with the second half of that? And I was like, well, actually, it's ready.
Ironically,
and they're like, and they're like, oh, that would be useful because we'd like to do it, and we didn't want to have to wait too long. Well, I'm like, you don't have to wait because the whole book's finished. And so That's the great part about this for fans of the series is after this big long gap, you don't have to worry. The rest of the book is going to come out like clockwork, one a month. But yeah, the weirdest book. I've never had anything like that experience in my whole career. It was a real test of resilience and just believing that it was going to happen, and also having my kids being like, "Daddy, when are you putting out the next? When's the next Last Witch coming out? When's the quiet Dad's going through an emotional breakdown."
That's an incredible story. Oh my, like, wow. I'm actually like, I'm blown away by that because you don't hear about that, like something like that happen. And then like, I can only imagine what you and the creative team is going through with this. It's like, oh my God. But at least, like I say, the fan base was there excited for it. And obviously with the issue coming out for Blood and Betrayal, June 18th, can't emphasize that enough at the LCS. Make sure you go get your copies. What can we talk about that obviously we want to keep this spoiler free concerning that book.
Yes. Okay. So what can we talk about? Okay. So I guess it's a little tricky because I'm sure some people here will maybe not have read the first book. And the first thing I'll say is I really do highly recommend you read the first book. Because the second book, Blood and Betrayal picks up, like the next day after Fear and Fire, which is the title of the first book, ends. And so, to take a step back, the journey for Saoirse is she has to master these 4 elemental magics. This is where the last airbender Avatar: The Last Airbender comes in, right? As Aang needs to go from being an airbender to someone who can master all forms of bending, Saoirse has to learn these 4 elemental magics. And to do so, she's kind of has to defeat a witch who is a master of each of these elemental magics. So that is our setup, right? It's like we fought one witch, where's the next one? Is it hunting me? Am I hunting them? And with the buildup of, okay, if I can defeat these 4 witches, I'm going to face down the queen of the witches. And if I can defeat the queen of the witches, then maybe I've saved the world, or oh no, she opened the door. And so the even greater monster is now lying behind that. So that's kind of what we said that's not a huge spoiler. You kind of learn that all very quickly in the first book. So when we start the second book, Saoirse has defeated 3 of the sisters. So there is at least one more and this queen of the witches. But one of the things V did so well, and what we wanted to do is when you first meet Saoirse, the very first shot is you see her as this kind of determined, kind of angry young woman, because she's kind of in the middle of this argument with this boy about this journey past the hedge. And within a couple pages, we see her laughing and joyous and happy. We see, okay, this is who she is at her best. In the world of The Last Witch, magic is not for us. The lore of magic in The Last Witch is that it has leaked out of the Irish mythology, the fairy lands. It has leaked through this door that is closed. And only certain people who have an affinity for it can sense it and can touch it in a way and can use it. The problem is because it's not for us, it changes us. So every time Saoirse learns a new spell, every time she defeats one of these sisters and gains some of their power to add to her own, so she is better equipped to defeat the rest of the coven and hopefully the queen of the witches, and then whatever is behind that door, she is getting closer to saving the world, but she's also getting closer to becoming one of them, to becoming a witch herself. And if things go wrong, maybe she's even the last witch. So think of it as like a Breaking Bad, in that stronger she gets, the more likely she is going to lose who she is. And so when you get to the end of the first book, not to spoil too much, there is an image that parallels like the very first image of the book, but where that was in a moment of Saoirse being angry and upset. By the end of the first book, we've started to get a real sense of the possible toll that her trying to save the world could take. And so part of book 2 is really exploring this idea of could our hero become the villain? And if she does she have to be stopped? Can she be redeemed? Can the rest of the fellowship save her? Or could this story take a darker turn than you might expect off the top? So that's kind of what we're dealing with. But issue number 1 specifically, we get a little bit of a break. We get to see Saoirse take a deep breath and try to have some fun. And that's when an entirely new group of witches that she has no idea exist get introduced to our story. and they tell Saoirse that everything she knows about magic is wrong. And then we get a little cliffhanger from that.
How can you not be excited about this? Like I say, I'm chomping at the bit to get my LCS and go get this issue. And that is literally coming off. If you read The Last Witch, and we can't stress that enough too, because where this episode is going to air on podcast or YouTube, you have 1 week to track it down, read it, catch up, and then get to the LCS and pick up this Blood Betrayal, because this is going to be something very, very special. What can we say about that?
So talking about how much you're doing this as Irish Avatar, where did the idea for doing this in the Celtic inspiration at that particular time come from? And on top of it, how many people butchered their names?
It's funny actually, because we were supposed to have a pronunciation guide in the first book, and that it got missed. We all missed it in the final going through. Another weird thing that happened in that book. Goes through, we're like, great, it gets printed out. I'm like, oh, where's the prono guide? And they're like, oh, that wasn't in there. And then the editor, I was like, wait, and we just swore we saw it because we'd gone back and forth the actual text, and it just never made it into the book. So my dad was born in Ireland, and so my brother and I both grew up with Irish mythology. And one of the things that I loved about Irish mythology, kind of going off the Secret of Nim Dark Crystal conversation we had, is it's a little scary. Most Irish mythology ends with, if the hero is victorious, they have sacrificed something substantial for that victory. A lot of Pyrrhic victories and a lot of scary monsters, and sometimes even like heroes not really being that heroic. And so I've always loved that kind of moral ambiguity. And like we were talking about this being an all ages book, it's not like this book, goes off the rails or goes any place that isn't appropriate for anybody, but it does ask some questions, and it will have readers being like, well, wait, like what? Wait, that's not supposed to happen. Like no, the good guys are always supposed to win. And so it does create some questions about that. It makes me think when I was younger, and this may be a fever dream. This comic may not actually exist, but I have a vivid memory of reading a Green Lantern Corps comic at a cottage that my family rented when I was probably like 11 or 12. And in it, the Green Lantern Corps, including Hal Jordan, all seem to have been defeated and maybe even killed by this villain. It was the second part or the third part or the fourth part of a limited run, sometime probably in the late 70s, early 80s is probably when this book was published. And I just remember this villain defeating the entire Green Lantern Corps in what was actually like, it seemed like a very brutal fight, and then stepping into our sun and then closing the sun behind him. So our whole like galaxy just ended. And I've like looked for it online. I like put in the summary. I haven't tried ChatGPT yet. So I may have imagined this whole thing, but that was one of those stories where I was like, man, like when things go bad, you actually remember them more. So there is a bit of that. But rest assured, if you read the Last Witch Volume 1, and then once we get through Volume 2, I'm going to take you on a ride, but we're going to land in a place that is okay. We're going to land in a place that you're like, okay, I feel like it's safe to get out of the plane. We're okay. But there's going to be some turbulence to get you there.
But that makes for the best rides, because then you have those memorable stories like you alluded to. And especially with dealing with a fantasy story like this and doing it with an all ages mindset going in, what is the biggest challenge about presenting this to the reader?
That's an interesting question. I try not to think too much about it. Like, so I've written, Kill Shakespeare's older than that, but I wrote a little bit for Adventure Time and Regular Show, the comic book series, right? So that's another one that's a bit aimed at younger readers to a degree. And I actually just finished a book with my wife. We co-wrote it for Scholastic that'll come out in another year or so from now. And one of the things I've kind of learned is when I'm writing for a younger audience, if that's my like first target audience, is I actually don't really think too much about the fact that I'm writing for a younger audience. I think at the end of the day, my personal belief, again, this is maybe a philosophy as a dad, is that kids are ready for what they're ready for, and when they encounter something they're not ready for, they tend to not really engage in it. So if there's a part of The Last Witch that goes over a kid's head, I don't think they really spend that much time. They just don't even notice that stuff. And so I just try to write the most compelling story possible. And I mean, it was certainly helpful because, I looked at my older two children were I've got three. The young guy was just like, I don't even, he wasn't even around when we started this book. But I did have the older two as sort of little character templates. So there is a lot of my daughter in Saoirse. There's a lot of my middle son in Brahm. And so those moments were the things. There are little moments where, you know, my son will read it. He'll be like, "Oh, you based that on me, right?" I'll be like, "Yeah." He's like, "Yeah, that's totally me." You know, so there are those moments where I'm like, "Oh, that's definitely a kid moment," because I've literally just kind of stolen from my own life and been like, "Oh yeah, that's how my kids would react in this scenario." But yeah, I just, you know, I think I do all the same things. I mean, I like stories that are a little dark. I like stories where you're not sure how it's going to turn out. And you know, you just don't push your impulse all the way to the end because you're like, oh, at a certain level, that's far enough, right? Like The Secret of Nim, you know, for those who have, if you've seen it, there's a terrifying owl in The Secret of Nim, right? On a mountain of bones. I kind of borrowed the mountain of bones idea for a little bit in one part of The Last Witch. But that book only needs to go that far, or sorry, The Secret of Nim, the movie, the book as well, only needs to go that far because that owl in the tree, in that environment, is more than enough to, even as an adult, to get your heart kind of pumping. And so, yeah, I think you just, you know, I think if you worry about trying to make something quote unquote for kids, I think you probably undershoot the mark and you don't challenge them. And to me, that's what a great story should do. It should be a little challenging.
Uh, that's a great assessment too, because like I say, it's just always one of those when you kind of are really kind of doing with it all ages, you got to cover all the bases. So it's kind of interesting to just kind of see, you know, what goes into that behind the scenes process. Tom?
And humor, right? Humor. I think that's a big thing, right? Is I definitely am more conscious about trying to make sure I've got funny stuff happening here and there because you know I may not worry about that as much in other stories, but even in general, any story, I think, you know, if you're not going to laugh a little bit in a story, it seems a bit of a waste. Anyways.
Sure.
And you just hit on it. You know, where do you find that nice balance between pushing that mark where you think that the kids or younger adults can, you know, comprehend, you know, what you're putting out there versus, you know, not placating just to the younger audience. So using humor as a great source is fantastic. Have you ever thought that in your career outside of just The Last Witch that you might have pushed that mark just a little too far and then go,
Huh. I mean, that's interesting, right? Because before I did comics, the first thing I did, you know, I was a journalist. I worked for film and TV, but the first thing I did kind of professionally as a storyteller is I created a kids TV show with Anthony Delcall, the guy I did Kill Shakespeare with. And it, you know, it was a animated kind of Pokemon meets Scooby-Doo, I guess, for lack of a better term, kind of idea. And it didn't end up going anywhere, but it really taught me a lot about, like you're saying, Tom, like about how to use humor and how to make sure things are fun and fast paced. And so with The Last Witch, I think, you know, if you go through the book, the very first issue of the whole series is a bit of a slow burn. And then it works to what I hope is a really good cliffhanger that makes people want to go on. Then the second book is the first half of the second issue of The Last Witch is bam, right? Like it is scary, it is intense. And so I kind of find that with all ages books, I'm probably a little bit more like calm it down, ramp it up. But then because, and I don't think I'm doing this consciously, but I'm just talking about it now. I'm like, oh, maybe there's some part of my brain that's like, okay, now let's slow it down, make it maybe a little more fun, maybe make it, we can deal with some of the emotional impact of what's just occurred. And I wonder if there's some part of me that's like, oh, for the younger reader in the scale, having that chance to decompress is good for them because it doesn't keep them like on high agitation. And then, you know, for an older young reader or an adult, they're like digging in, being like, wow, there's, you know, like you were saying, Ken, hopefully it feels like there's some real emotional layers and that this
Yeah.
is, there's a lot going on there. And so I think, yeah. And so if you look at Blood and Betrayal, the first book is kind of the same, or first issue is kind of the same as the first issue of the whole series, in that it kind of starts a little more benign. There's more playfulness, there's fun. And then all of a sudden, something potentially dangerous gets introduced to the story. And like the end, it's funny, actually, I hadn't really thought about this, but it really does parallel that first issue because you get to the end of the first issue of Blood and Betrayal, and the exact same character who is in a great deal of threat at the end of the very first issue of the whole book is now yet again in a great deal of threat. And hopefully both of those work as really effective cliffhangers where you're like, oh my gosh, like this is scary and I need to know it's going to be okay. But
Yeah.
And issue 2 of Blood and Betrayal will mirror issue 2 of the first series, Fear and Empire, because it is also kind of dark. It is the darkest and creepiest of the second book, just like I think issue 2 of the first book was the darkest and creepiest of that one.
Okay.
But it pushes it farther.
I could definitely see that. Yeah. I had to go back and like backtrack about which issues. Yeah, no, I would definitely say two is the one that really stood out to me from the first run. So definitely that'll be something to keep an eye out for as we're diving back into this universe. And speaking of this universe, you have a very wide array of characters that you write. Who has been your favorite to write for and why?
And not the ones that your kids are based on.
I
Sorry, can't use
mean,
the dad answer.
like, hey, I mean, it's funny. I mean, it's a bit of a cheat, but I think they all scratch itches in different ways, right? I think when a story's really humming and every character has a really clear role and you know what their role is, then I think they're all like really satisfying for different reasons. Like Brahm, I really enjoy writing because he's just like the most fun. He is the lead. There is nothing intense about his character. Some intense things happen to this character, but
Sure.
he is your classic, he is the younger brother who, like in the first story, when Saoirse is sneaking out of the woods, he follows his sister. And when his sister's like, if you don't go home, I'm going to tell dad you're going to be in big trouble. He's just like, I'll tell dad what you're doing. And she's like, yeah, well played. And when he finds out that his sister is a witch, he's like, cool. Like, will you take me flying on your broom? And she's like, I don't know if it works that way, actually. And so he's fun for that purpose. Saoirse's great just because she's so intense. Like she is, and she's the heart of the story and she's got the hardest struggle. And, I feel the worst for her because she goes through horrible things. Hugh, who we haven't talked about, is kind of a comic relief character. He's a lot of fun because he's there to just sort of lift the mood. But when you dive into his own story, you realize that, he's hiding a lot and, a lot, not just in terms of things he knows that he's in telling the other characters, but also kind of what he's gone through and what his demeanor is covering up. And I kind of love Nan because she's, the grandmother, because she's a great example of, I just put a video on one of my channels talking about how originality is overrated and that I'm a thief. I steal ideas. And I talk about how Pablo Picasso talks about how good artists borrow and great artists steal. Which, by the way, he stole that quote from T.S. Eliot, but that's another story. And so I like Nan because she's actually loosely based on what I thought the grandmother from Roald Dahl's The Witches was maybe going to turn into. So you may remember she's the cigar smoking grandmother.
Yeah.
She is the moral guide. She's the Obi-Wan Kenobi of that story. But there was something specific about the cigar smoking that I thought was going to be the plot of The Witches. And it just isn't. It goes in a totally different way. And that's totally good. It works. It's Roald Dahl. Of course it works. But I just couldn't help but get that out of my mind. And so I remember I told you I wrote this short story about the little girl going to the woods. So when Boom was like, okay, but what's the rest? I was there being like, I don't know. And then I remembered, because I told them there was going to be a grandmother in it. I remembered the grandmother from The Witches, and I remembered what I thought that character might turn out to be. And so that's actually really the seed of what truly The Last Witch became, was this idea of, oh, what if the grandmother from Roald Dahl's story was this grandmother? Okay, well, I'm going to put her into this story. And so she's really satisfying to write for me because she's probably the character I've been thinking about the longest, but I just had no place to put her. I didn't know what to do with this cigar smoking grandmother. And so, yeah, they're all kind of, and then, with the villains, like it's fun to do a good villain. Like you don't get to spend as much time with them. Right. Like in The Last Witch, it is very much like a monster of the week kind of book. We face down a witch, we defeat the witch. So I don't get a long-term relationship with any of these monstrous ladies, but they're all very fun in their own ways to come up.
Yeah, I have to agree with about not. She just, when I see her just smoking the cigar and just running traffic there, I'm just like, yeah, you know what? She's the one that kind of stands out and is really kind of helping the guide where they need to go. And there's just something about her just stands out because she dabbles a little bit in the comic relief, but then when we have to get serious, she gets serious too. But like I said, all the characters have been really great and they've all really stood out. So that when readers are picking this up, that you're definitely going to have their favorite. Tom, what's your favorite character?
I'm also gonna have to go with Nan because she is so different. You always see that maternal or mentor type, that's either extremely stoic or extremely lovey-dovey. And she's like, Yeah. And
Yeah, it's perfect.
okay, that's what you got to do. Like, do it. Just as simple as that. Now, before we talk about Ken's favorite character, which I'm guessing is probably just the same.
Oh yeah, I said none. Yeah.
What about, after this arc concludes, how much more do we have waiting in the wings? Now, we were talking, you did mention that, that this was cut up into the 5 singles, and then we get the trade, and now we got book 2. Is there, and again, this was maybe to let the boom gods know, do we want this all done as one big, huge, giant coffee table slam down book?
that would be pretty cool. That would definitely be pretty cool. So getting to the end of Blood and Betrayal will get us to the full story that I had originally imagined.
Mhm.
If the boom gods and I suppose the comic reader gods demand it, I do know what I would want to do with these characters next. And so, to aid that a little bit, there's a slight cliffhanger at the very end of the full story. There is one significant question that is sort of left for the audience to go with. And I think that can work two ways, right? I mean, I've always loved stories where there was a question. And so then, like I remember as a kid, you'd watch something or read something that you really liked, and there'd be a little question at the end. And I would go to bed like thinking and then dreaming about, well, what happened next in the story and putting myself in the story. What if I was the new character so there is a little bit of that. So yeah, I would love to do more with these characters, but yeah, I mean, I think it'd be really cool to have a hardcover Last Switch. I mean, I guess we'll have to see how this all goes, but that would be pretty cool. That's a great idea, Tom. Please write up your notes, give me some specs, and I'll flip it over to Boom. We'll see what we can get. Like French flaps. Let's do French flaps.
Ooh.
Let's do pop-ups. How about that? Well,
Ooh.
Oh, take it back to the 90s. Take it back to the 90s. I'm here for it. Get a little chromaine cover for action. Yeah.
Die cut everything.
Yes.
With extra pouches. If we're gonna do 90s.
Oh, of course. There's got to be a pouch variant. But like we say, we can't emphasize enough about that book because, like we say, we want to see more of The Last Witch at the shelf. So everybody needs to go out and go get Blood and Betrayal #1. But there is another book that is coming out later this year that is one that if you're a music fan or a historian, this is going to be right up your alley. Fela, Music is the Weapon. Connor, let's talk about this book.
Sure. So Fela Kuti this book, Fela Music is a Weapon, is based it's kind of the true life story of Fela Kuti. So the best way to introduce someone to Fela Kuti if they don't know who he is he is the Bob Marley of Africa. If Bob Marley had 55 plus records, married 27 women in one day, was arrested 200 times, and started his own country. That's Fela Kuti. So he is the father of Afrobeat. He is a sex, drugs, and rock and roll figure. He is a guy who would call out by name the leaders of the Nigerian military governments, because Nigeria became a republic, and then quickly just had coup after coup after coup. And so Fela Kuti is this guy sitting there and being like, no, I'm going to say you by name, and I'm going to sing about what's wrong with you, which is kind of fits into the Nigerian tradition. This idea originally came from my co-creator in this, Jibola Fagbamie, who's a buddy of mine for a long time. He's a Nigerian Canadian, grew up in Nigeria. He grew up listening to Fela Kuti like secretly because he was a middle class kid. He was a nice middle class kid who did the right thing. Except he listened to this guy Fela Kuti, who was considered hugely controversial. He's always like, oh man, if my mom knew I was listening, she would like straight up kick my ass, right? Which is probably actually a literal thing that would have happened because, as as we talk about in the book, the corporal punishment it was still pretty much in vogue, and so the story of Fela is really looking at this really, incredible musician, very funny guy, very transgressive. He, what hurt his career the most was he just kept telling the truth as he saw it. And when he was talking about how there was oppression and the legacy of colonialism, right? People were beside him. When he started taking on things like the Nigerian military, Nigeria is not so dissimilar to the United States in that it has a fairly large military. Military is deep in the culture. And so to come after the military meant you were coming after probably someone in almost everybody's family. that still went over pretty well because most people like what you're saying about it is correct. You know, you're not talking about my father, my brother. You're talking about the way the military is used in this country.
Mhm.
You know, and then he started talking about religion. And so he just kept pushing it and kept pushing it. And so it's the kind of book where, you know, I think for a lot of readers, there'll be things you see that you hear, or sorry, you see, sorry, that you read, where you'll be like, yes, I'm 100% behind that guy. And then like 10 pages later, you'll be like, this guy's an idiot.
Yeah.
Like, what the heck, right? And we really wanted to, it was really important to Jabola, especially this idea of like, let's not sanitize this guy, right? Like, it brings up to an interesting question when you have a hero, and maybe this is relevant for the kind of cancel culture we're in. I'd like to reframe it as consequence culture, in that like when you do things, you should have to pay the consequences. There 100% need to be consequences. When people say or do things, the whole "I'm just joking" or "come on, sweetheart," you know, you have a sense of humor, you know, that kind of garbage doesn't fly. But you also have to have a conversation about, okay, well, who can come back, right? What is too far and what is not? And
Right.
so you look at Fela and like bluntly, the guy was a misogynist. In some ways, he was very much ahead of his time about women's rights. He gave a space in his commune, his country was a place where women could just show up and get a job, right? In his club, women could go unattended. Pretty much anywhere else in Nigeria at that time, if a woman was on her own at a club, she was a prostitute, right? Fellow was like, no, I want women to come. I want them to come with their friends. I want them to be free, to have space, right? So in some ways, he's this very progressive figure. But he has a song called Lady. He has a song called Mattress. In Lady, he calls out women who want sort of Western style rights. You know, that's not Nigerian. You know, like the man is still the boss.
Mm.
Mattress is basically about, you know, when I'm getting horny, you should be ready to lie underneath me, right? So you've got one guy out on one hand, he's a champion of women's rights, and
Mm.
on the other hand, by today's standards, he's incredibly regressive. And so we try to wrestle with that in the book, but it's just part of what makes him such a fascinating character because in so many ways you're like, wow, this is a guy who's trying to fight the good fight. He's trying to he's trying to take down authoritarianism, right? He's trying to say that we should all have our voice, and yet the way he ran his band was not that dissimilar to the way he accused the Nigerian military government of trying to run the country, which is do what I say. And if you don't do what I say, you're going to catch a smack. So it's
Mm.
a really interesting story. You don't need to know anything about Africa or Fela's music, although, you know, his music is incredible. Anybody's listening to this and is curious, go listen to a song called Zombie. It's probably his most controversial song, and it's a banger. You know, you don't need to know any of that. And it also for American readers, it's interesting because until Fela came to America, very classic Fela, he made up a huge story about how James Brown was a massive fan of his. And he told all the Nigerian newspapers that there was this real shame because all his American friends were saying, James Brown is playing your songs at his concerts all across America. And all these American musicians are like going crazy for your music. And here I am sitting in Nigeria. And if I could only get to America, I would make so much money and we would have this Nigerian champion. And so, of course, the Nigerian papers ate that up. That was
Mm.
true. Miles Davis was a fan, but James Brown there's not a lot of evidence that he was playing Fela's music. And so he kind of hoodwinked a company to take him on a tour of America, except he gets off the plane in America and the company isn't there. They've kind of hoodwinked him by telling him they're going to run a tour. So he just lands in the States and they're like not even there to meet him at the airport. And so he ends up just barnstorming through the States and he ends up in LA and he meets a woman who's been active with the Black Panthers. And she's the one who changes his politics. It's really interesting. Fela starts as a guy who's like, oh, the problem with Africa is Africans, right? He's like, look, North America works, Europe works. Why doesn't Africa work? Something must be wrong with us. And she's like, fool, like you. And so she hands him, you know, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, Marcus Garvey. And so he starts reading all these thinkers and he's like, and it changes his life because he's like, oh my God, I have been so colonized by the way the Brits put in the education system, the way they made us think about ourselves. It never even occurred to me that the reason we're failing is not because of us, it's because we were set up to fail. And now, don't get me wrong, says Bella, we're doing a lot of stupid shit. We're not blameless in this. But the original sin is the fact that we got colonized and we got conquered and we got told that we were not, our ways of living were not worth it. We're not valuable. And so it totally changes. He goes from a guy who literally is singing about his soup to a guy who has written some of the most incendiary, compelling, and ballsy songs in the history. And he's just a funny character. I'll give one last quick story just to give a sense. So at one point, he's one of the biggest stars in Africa. He's actually become one of the biggest stars in the world in the late 70s. And he sings his song Zombie, and it has a really negative effect as far as the government. The government comes in and they storm his compound, his country. They beat the crap out of everybody's there. They do horrible things to the women who are there. They throw his mother, who helped Nigeria get independence from Britain, who was like 70 or 76 or something. They throw her out of a second floor window, right? they jump on him. And Fellas gets beaten so badly, he swears that he sees his spirit leave his body. But he survives, and the first thing he does, he goes back on stage, he's got all his bandages on, and he sings the song again. His record company has always had this love-hate relationship with him. Fela makes him money, but they're the exact kind of people that he's talking about, these gluttons, these people who don't share with the rest of Nigerian society. So they take the advantage of the fact that the government is suing him for this music to stop paying him his royalties. So Fela's had his compound invaded. They burn it to the ground. So he's got nowhere to live. Most of his band, who all live there, like 50, 60 people, they have nowhere to live. And Fela's like, who do I know who has a financial interest in me making more music? Why, it's my record company. And so he basically invades the record company, takes it over, moves in with like 30 people, like livestock, everything. And he just squats, and he's like, yeah, until you pay me my royalties, this is where I live now. And so he and that's what he does. He lives there for weeks before they can get him out of there. And I won't tell you why, because I don't want to spoil that part of the story. But yeah, he's just a very interesting, very funny story. At times, it's very sad at others. It is your kind of classic music bio, right? It all those classic tropes exist for a reason. But we play a little bit in with Yoruba spirituality. We play a little bit with like some of the classic mythology of the Yoruba culture. And yeah, like I said, you don't need to really know anything going in. The whole story will tell you what you need to know. And yeah, if you have any love for a bio, if you love a rebel, if you love watching somebody take on authority, then I think it could be a book you'd really like. And the art is absolutely incredible. Jabola is actually a fine artist by trade, and it's the kind of book that I think, we've got some things planned, but I'm like, we got to start them quick, Jabola, because they're going to knock on your door. Like what you did in this book is not normal. It's pretty incredible.
Oh my, like that was like, I'm just hearing the story coming and I'm just like, oh my, like, I'm even like, I'm like trying to form my words and I can't even do that because it's just like, you talk about a polarizing character. I mean, and especially in the world of music, there has been quite a lot of them. And as you're diving into the background of Fela, was there any story that really took you by surprise? Like of everything that you did, was there any one like in particular that stood out and you went, whoa, like did not see that coming?
Um,
You can say, I don't want to spoil anything for the book.
so there is one song he has written called "Expensive Shit." Look, that is the name of the song, and it is based on the fact that the government tried to plant marijuana on him, which is kind of hilarious because he used a prodigious amounts of the devil's weed. But in this one raid, they raided him before, and he'd kind of been able to get rid of the evidence. And so they raided him the next week, and Fela was like, "No, I'm not keeping anything in the house because these guys are going to come back." And they did, and then somebody found one joint, and they were like, "We're putting you into we're going to send you to prison, and you could get killed for this in Nigeria." Would they have done that to Fela? I don't know, but they could have. So Fela, quickly thinking, grabs the joint and swallows it. So now the government's like, well, we're going to wait till you pass it. And that's how we're going to prove that you had this in your person. And so there's Fela in like one of the worst prisons in Africa. But if he goes to the bathroom, he is in deep And so it's this very bizarre, and like it's one of those stories that like it has to be true because you would never think of it this way. He goes in there, he thinks he's going to get beaten to death because he's in like the most dangerous cell in the most dangerous prison. And of course, like the first people he meets are like, "It's Fela, Fela's here," because he's a hero to the working class, right?
Right.
He's a hero. He's singing songs about how these guys are getting screwed over. And so this whole prison cell like bands together for like 4 days and does everything they need to do to keep the prison guards from being able to go through Fela's excrement to find out if it's a bizarre story. Again, I won't go too much into it other than
No,
the
but yeah.
specifics. But yeah, and he wrote a song called Expensive Shit because his lawyer told him that he had had the most expensive shit in the history of Nigeria. Because when you factor in how much it cost to arrest him, hold him, go through this stuff, send him back to the doctors, like yeah, it's too weird to not be true.
It's wild. I mean, that's the only thing I'm trying to process this right now. Wow. Yeah.
I hate to
Tom.
say it. I got you, Ken. But it sounds like he and I share the same playbook in some regards. Now, I got this, Ken. Now, very much Celtic to Europa. You write stories that are very diverse backgrounds. What leads you into that?
I mean, so for like the Last Witch, and I've got another series coming out next year called Trickster, which also kind of dabbles in Irish mythology. Just weirdly, they weren't meant to come out so close together, but they did. So I mean, that stuff is like that's my heritage, that's my background. With Fela, I mean, Jabola originally came to me because he wanted to do one very specific part of Fela's story, which I told you about this big raid. He wanted to do this raid, and we talked about it, and I kind of had said to him, I was like, and I knew a little bit about Fela. So I used to live in Ghana, which is a next door neighbor to Nigeria. I was a journalist there for about 8 months. And so I had a little bit of awareness of some. I mean, Nigeria and Ghana have different cultures, but it's not. It's kind of like Canada and the United States, where you're like, oh, on the surface they're actually seem pretty similar, and then if you spend any meaningful time in the States versus Canada or Nigeria versus Ghana, you're like, oh, okay, no, there are some significant differences, but you might not notice them, being a stranger to the culture right away. So I had a bit of understanding. And so, Jabal and I talked about it. And I was like, look, like Bella's story is so crazy because I didn't know too much about him until Jabal starts like, giving me the story I just told you. And I'm like, oh my God, like this guy is like, all he did was live stories. Like there were so many we couldn't fit in the book. And I was like, I think you should do a whole story about Fela, right? Like you should tell his whole story. And Jabal was like, wow, that's a really good idea. So we went away, and probably a month or so he came back and he was like, dude, it's like you're 100% right, but I can't write it. He'd written a couple of small things. He's like, this is too big for me. But he's like, we were good friends. He loved Kill Shakespeare. He's like, would you write it? Like, would you write it? We'll come on the story together, and then you can do the writing. And at first I was like, I got to think about it because the first thing I'm thinking about is, okay, well, I mean, I've got a certain complexion, right? I am not African. I have spent a little bit of time in Africa, but that doesn't, like, I'm not African, right? Like, is this a story that I can be involved in? And so, when I took a step back, I was like, okay, I was like, Jabol is going to be there, right? We're not going to get the Nigerian stuff wrong because he's Nigerian, right? So we're good there. And Fela's a historical figure, so we can do our research. I'm not inserting myself. I'm not pretending that I'm anything I'm not. And the core of his story about this guy who's talking about the legacy of colonialism, the legacy of totalitarianism, right? The idea of the corrosive effects that high-end capitalism can have on any society, right? When the rich just get too rich. All that stuff, I was like, yeah, this is all stuff that like I believe. And so from my own perspective, I was like, this is a story I want to help tell because Fela is a flawed human being, but I think what he was saying was generally pretty much on the nose about how the world does work and why that is not beneficial for most of us. And it was interesting because early on when we were pitching the book, we actually had a children's publisher come to us, and which was really strange. And they were like, oh, they're like, we love this story. We were wondering if you'd be willing to do it from the point of view of, say, like a 13-year-old boy who is part of this commune, maybe somebody who lives in the neighborhood, and so we can learn a bit about Fela through this kid coming in and out of the commune, but it's really going to be this young boy's story of being, you know, a 13-year-old in the 70s, which is a great time in Nigeria. At the point of the book, the biggest part of the book, the Nigerian naira was worth more than the US dollar or the UK pound, right? Because they had oil and they had a lot of it. So it's this kind of crazy moment where like the most valuable currency in the world is in Africa. Um, and we were like, oh, wow, that's a really cool take. But that one we stepped back because I was like, that one was going to be tougher for me to decide to write. Because I'm like, now I'm trying to put myself in the head of a 13-year-old boy in a certain perspective. And Jabul can give me insight into that, but that's a different time and environment than he grew up in. And that was for us, we were like, that might be a bridge too far because that story would be so much about being an African and about that time in Africa where I was like, okay, that's probably somebody else's story to tell. But this one, you know, like I like to joke with Jabola, I'm always like, oh man, you know, if somebody gets really angry, I'm just going to be like, I mean, he asked me to write it, so you got to ask him why he thought I could do this. But you know, honestly, all kidding aside, you know, it's like, okay, this is a book where if you do your research and you're working with someone who knows the culture, then from where Jabal and I sat, we're like, yeah, we think this is fine, and you know, I think we made a really good book. So, but you know, we'll find out. I'm really interested. I'm actually really interested to see. You could look at one side and you say you've got a multiracial creative team that is trying to talk about universal things through the lens of this African artist. And we don't talk a lot about Africans except for in like, you know, for Jabola, he was very much like, yeah, like mostly how we look at Africans is through the lens of slavery. You know, it's like these brave, stoic people who overcame, and that's 100% something that has happened. But he's like, it really limits what Africa is, and the joy and the intelligence, and the fact is, you know, honestly, he's like, you know, there's not really that much difference in terms of how people actually are. And so for him, that was a really important thing, was to be like, this story should show African joy. It should show characters who are not noble. You know, even our main character is not always noble. You know, like let's actually let these characters be fully multidimensional humans in a way that sometimes stories about Africa kind of compress. You know, it's like, oh man, look how much they overcame. He's like, yeah, of course, but like it's so much more than that. You know, there's so much more to our culture than that. So that was kind of exciting. You know, there's a little piece of me that's like, hey, if nothing else, if this has people reading a little bit more and they learn a little bit about Africa, awesome, cool. I think that's a pretty good outcome.
Absolutely. And this book will be coming out in October of 2025 in the liner notes of the podcast and YouTube channel. You can definitely go pre-order now. You definitely don't want to miss this. I mean, the stories can just, even the teaser stories we're hearing now have got me peaked and ready to go get this book because I am like, I need to go deep dive about this.
Mm-hmm.
So
now,
Tom?
speaking of which, you know, since we're talking about stories and so on and doing your homework, when it comes to if you got an opportunity to do you know, a graphic novel biography on a comic book character, you know, or any character you've worked on that you really just want to give them their own semi autobiography, who would it be?
Oh, I mean, so I kind of did one for Juliet in the Kill Shakespeare series because we did do a book that imagined like what if what if Juliet lived, who would she become? That was kind of a conceit of the Kill Shakespeare. Hey there, I've always wanted to do Falstaff is one of the characters in Kill Shakespeare. For those of you, if you don't know Falstaff, there's kind of two versions of Falstaff. There is he was a character that was so popular, the Queen of England told William Shakespeare to write him into a whole different play because he features in a couple plays about Henry. So Shakespeare put him in this play called The Merry Wives of Windsor. It's one of the only it's like really it's like one fan service play, and Falstaff is this like very enjoyable like buffoon, right? He drinks too much, he eats too much. He's a coward, but he knows he's a coward. You know, like he's just a character. You just want to be with this guy. You're like, oh yeah, you're no good, but you know you're no good. And so like I like you. And so in the Kill Shakespeare stories, not to spoil too much, but a spoiler alert, Falstaff doesn't make it. And I've always wanted to do a story like kind of a Nick Fury and his Howling Commandos kind of story, except it's Ghost Falstaff and all his illegitimate children. And so it's just like all these kind of homely kids who like whose parents like whose mothers kind of hate them because like Falstaff was a father and he was a ne'er-do-well at that point of his life. And so you've got all these kids who are just kind of outcasts who like find each other and are like, you look just like me. Like, oh my God, like how many of them are of us are out there? And then their ghost father, their no good deadbeat ghost father shows up and is like, I have a mission for you that can help save the kingdom. And so through that, I think it would just be interesting to like, hey, I love the idea of a bunch of like kind of bizarre looking misfit kids who all look the same. But I also like the idea of, like you have the worst father ever, but he's a ghost. But like he's trying. Like he's a dad who's like he realizes he kind of missed it the first time around, and he's not going to let a little thing like death keep him from being better the second time around.
Yeah. That's right.
So yeah, I think that's what I've always wanted to do. I don't know. We're relaunching Kill Shakespeare. We actually have recollected the first 5 volumes, and they're being redone by Gemstone. And actually, Anthony wrote a new adventure, so there may be room to do more. But that would be my secret, just totally goofy, silly action adventure of a bunch of kids trying to save the kingdom with their deadbeat ghost dad.
It's always a good episode when you get the word ne'er-do-well. So I'm good.
Yeah, there's a lot of potential to be had there. Like I say, that is one that we definitely want to see the fans go and demand at the shops, demand from the publishers, along with More the Last Witch, and definitely want to make sure you got the Fela book lined up in October when it drops too. And before we let you go, Connor, one thing that I know about you is you are a big sports fan. Used to do some writing at SB Nation, and I told Tom, I said, when we're talking to Connor, we got to talk a little sports. So that said, I know we mentioned hockey a little bit. What's been your take on the Stanley Cup Finals?
I mean, this may be something that the casual audience member may not know, but Canadians hate the idea of any other Canadian team winning. So I'm really torn between like the Oilers, who like, why should Edmonton get any joy? Right.
Yeah.
Like, if we can't win, I don't want anybody to win. Right. And like, sure, I get it. Connor McDavid is a generational player, and Leon Draisaitl is amazing. They've also got Corey Perry, who was a guy I hated so much during his career that when he would play for Team Canada, I kind of secretly hoped Team Canada would lose. I just hate that guy. Um, but on the other hand, you have the Florida Panthers, who knocked the Leafs out twice in a row in the playoffs, who are a great hockey team, but they have Brad Marchand, who was the most dislikable guy in hockey, but now has somehow become like the jerky uncle that everybody kind of loves now.
Yeah, he's like
I
Oscar the Grouch. Like he's now become boring. Like seriously, I am with you. Like I honestly, if it's not the Rangers in the East, I tune out. And I'm like with Edmonton, but it's like Edmonton's already had the cup, like I don't know how many times, in the past. Because it's Gretzky, obviously that era. And I guess my loyalty has to go there with Mark Messier and the 6 degrees of, where the puck drops. But I'm with you. Like the Florida turnaround is like absolutely blown me away. And I'm just like, like, can we just have a tie and just carry it over next year? Just, put another layer on the cup.
Yeah, you know what I mean. The one thing though is the first 2 games have both been fantastic.
Yes, they
So
have.
I guess if I'm going to be stuck with like, do I want to be shot in the face or shot in the nuts? Uh, if that's my choice, I have nut shot or face shot. But at least it's going to be an entertaining series. It looks like it's going to be a great series. The last series they played last year, of course, was one of the all-timers, right? Florida racing into a 3-0 lead, Edmonton coming all the way back and forcing in Game 7. Like that was high drama. You're watching some of the absolute. I mean, with McDavid and Draisaitl, you are watching 2 of the absolute best of this era playing together. And the
Agreed.
Panthers are just a really, really good. They're solid top to bottom. It's a really good hockey team. It's just one of those things that as a Leafs fan, you're just like, not last year, I don't think, but I think they've lost 7 or 8 years in a row now in the first or second round.
Yeah.
And every time but 2, they ended up losing to the team that went to the Stanley Cup final or won it. So there's a little bit of me that's like, well, I guess if Florida wins, we could say, well, yeah, but we would say, I don't know. There's some transformative. I don't know. I don't think that exists in sports when you're like, oh yeah, but we lost to the team that won it all. That means we're the second best team. I know that's not true, but I'm a Leafs fan. Just give me something. Just a little. Just a little something.
One of these years they got to do it. I'm fully like it's like the Cubs in baseball. Like at just some point, Toronto has to win the cup. I don't know how or why. It just never falls.
An
Their
asteroid wipes out the other 31 NHL teams, but they still compete anyways. Maybe.
It's like that time where the Eagles won the Super Bowl.
Yeah,
I mean, there's been a couple of those times now lately.
No, we've got 2, but we had to at least get 1.
Yes.
Right. Oh well, let's not go about Super Bowls. Okay, my Buffalo Bills are projected to, finally cash in. Except they're favored in every game right now, and it's like everything's looking gravy. But I'm just like, let's pump the brakes until we play the game.
I grew up hating the Bills, and I have now come all the way around where I'm like, I'm rooting for the. And part of that was because growing up in Toronto, there is a Canadian Football League. There are some Toronto Argonauts, and you'd have these NFL fans who were Bills fans because that's the closest local team.
Mhm.
But they were they weren't just Bills fans. They were like the
It's like,
CFL sucks. And
yeah.
I'm like, you can like if you want to prefer the NFL, that's fine. The NFL is undoubtedly has better players. It's faster, it's better. Nobody's going to argue that. But I can enjoy my weird little Canadian version of it. And you don't need to crap on that to be like, so I always kind of like Bills fans always drove me nuts. But like you look at how they've rebuilt this team after that long, long stretch of like misery.
Yeah.
And like Josh Allen is unquestionably one of the most fun guys to watch play football. He's like if Brett Favre wasn't a jerk, like like what if Brett Favre, but like actually likable and
Yeah.
and learned how to throw less interceptions. Like he's he's the most fantastic guy to watch. So I'm almost full on where I'm like, I think I'm rooting, like I'm a Packers guy. That's my NFL team. But I'm like beyond that, I'm like, I think I'm rooting for the Bills. And like just like people are like, oh, Josh Allen, blah. And I'm like, all he's done is lost to Patrick Mahomes
Yes.
in increasingly bizarre and like again, if you wrote how it happened, you'd be like, no, that's too far fetched. Like you lost to arguably the greatest quarterback ever, and you keep losing by like
Less than
we
3.
don't. Yeah,
Yeah.
you keep losing basically by the equivalent of one, like at the you keep losing the equivalent of a last second goal kind of thing. It's just anybody who thinks that Josh Allen can't win or he's not a winner is dumb.
Sorely wrong.
Oh, I agree.
Totally dumb.
The only thing that's about Josh is when he hurls people. I'm just like, stop. Like, you were too valuable. Mitchell Trubisky, granted, he's the closer. He can come in. When we see him in the game, we know the game is locked in.
Yep.
I don't want to see him in the second quarter because you feel that you need to go for 5 extra yards when we only need 3. Like, that's the only time you'll ever hear me say anything bad about Josh. And especially like how they've rebuilt that team. Like I said, I've sat through the JP Lossman era, the EJ Manuels, the Rob Johnsons. I mean, the lineage of quarterbacks. And then we're finally good with McDermott, even though McDermott makes me nervous in the final 2 minutes of any half more than any other coach I think I've ever watched. He overthinks everything, in my opinion. And I'm worried like it's one of these times it's just going to cost him that much. Like we're going to finally have that chance to the Super Bowl and then, you know,
I mean, that's what they used to say about Andy Reid, though, right? Andy
Yeah.
Reid was like, they were always like, oh, Andy Reid should hire a guy who just watches the clock because he's horrible with the clock. And I don't know if the coaches get better with repetition or, it's kind of like that Super Bowl when the Patriots beat the Seahawks, right? And the Hawks didn't hand it off to Marshawn Lynch. Everybody's like, oh my gosh, Pete Carroll, you're such an idiot. But I
Yeah.
remember somebody explaining it to me, and I was like, oh, this actually makes a lot of sense. And they're like, the problem for the Seahawks was that Pete Carroll thought exactly the same way Bill Belichick would have thought about that. And the idea was like, if you run on first down, you have to pass on second down because you can't run twice.
Mhm.
You'll run out of time, right? So if you run on first down, then your next play has to be a pass, or it's one more run and then the game is over. You're not going to get all 3 downs. But
Right.
if you pass on first down and it gets batted down, you'll have time to run it 2 more times. So what you've done is you forced the Patriots into second and third down into, well, they could run or they could pass instead of letting the Patriots know that they pretty much have to pass here. And they're like, actually, it was in terms of like, it seemed like what a stupid thing, but he was actually leaving himself with the maximum tactical flexibility. And they said the problem for him is the guy on the other side was Bill Belichick, who, while he seems to be losing his fastball in his day-to-day life, has always been a football genius.
Yeah.
And they're like, Bill Belichick was like, that's what I do. And Pete Carroll's a really smart coach. So I think that's what Pete Carroll's going to do. He's going to pass because that gives him the maximum tactical flexibility for however longer the regulation goes. And unfortunately, Bill guessed it. He sniffed it out, right? Like, I'm trying to remember the guy who made the interception, but he was like, yeah, like Belichick was telling us, like, this is probably going to be the play. If you see this, this is probably going to be the play. He saw it and he jumped it, and Pete Carroll's an idiot, but actually maybe he just unfortunately ran into a guy was just one level higher. Now you could say, well, I mean, now you're into 4-dimensional chess. Well, Pete Carroll should have realized that Bill Belichick would have thought like him, so that he should have done the other thing that Bill Belichick. No, but like, I mean, at a certain level, you're just like, okay, well, it's 2 Spider-Men pointing at each other.
Yeah, exactly. Like I say, Belichick is do like as a head coach, brilliant. And what the stuff, yeah, he does play that all-time chess game, and that's how it winds up winning too. And like I say, I always hated seeing him when he came to the Bills Stadium there because I'm just like, well, we're either going to pull off a miracle or he's going to let us get one over, and then he's going to beat us by 24 on the next round. But I mean, because he would always, I mean, Brady would always do it. Like remember the one season we got Lawyer Maloya because they just cut him, and then we beat him. I think it was like 37-0, and the next time around they beat us by 28. It was just like you can't you gotta give the Devils their due. But I'm
Yep.
hoping I'm optimistic for this year though for the Bills. But obviously we got a long way to go. I just need to make sure everybody's healthy. We're good. Nobody's going super crazy like the fans are sacrificing themselves in the pit again.
Well, and
Uh,
and right now, like the elite in the NFL is really good. Like there was a little stretch there where there weren't that many really good teams, but
mhm.
like the Bills are obviously really good. The Chiefs are still really good, and they've been able to add to that receiving core, so they should be more dangerous. The Ravens are obviously still very I mean, poor Lamar Jackson is twice as cursed as Josh Allen is, right?
Yeah.
Like you're still dealing with the Bengals who are trying to rebuild their defense if they do their good, and then on the other, you got the Eagles who are 100% really good. The Lions are really, really good. I think the Packers, I mean, I'm biased. I think the Packers are good, but not really good. But you get the Packers and the Vikings and the Rams, who are all like on any given Sunday teams where you're like, they could beat anybody.
Sure.
Like, it's just, there's a lot of really, really good teams. And I think there's a lot of teams that are sort of, a lot of New
Mediocre.
Orleans Saints kind of out there. A lot of New Orleans Saints, and the Cowboys will suck again. So that'll be nice too.
Yes, indeed.
I completely can agree with that. They can just stay down there in Texas.
So
Yeah.
what have you guys thought about, have you guys had any thoughts about the NBA, the playoffs, the finals?
I
You
have one
know,
thought.
LeBron versus MJ. Are we just going to send this whole thing burning down?
oh, it's MJ all day. There is no debate in my mind. It is MJ all day. LeBron, MJ didn't need a super team. He won on his own. The six is greater than whatever LeBron's been trying to do. And like for this finals, the Indiana Pacers are the luckiest team in all of basketball. And the fact that they got two game ones over on teams that were much better than them is just astonishing. But I fully think the Thunder is going to avenge it for everybody this season. SGA is going to go completely crazy the rest of the run here. But how Indiana got here is more so on the Knicks collapse more than anything because they basically either got too tired because Thibodeau was running the starters too much, or they just forgot to play defense for 5 out of 7, or yeah, 5 out of 6 games, legitimately.
So my first favorite two teams before the Raptors came into the NBA, my first favorite teams were the Reggie Miller era Pacers. Sorry.
That's all right.
And the Run TMC Warriors.
I love
And
that.
and so I look at this Pacers team and like on one level you're like, oh man, what a like you said, like the luckiest run ever. On the other hand, though, you're like, they absolutely beat the snot out of the Cavs. And I know the Cavs weren't 100% healthy, but they
Right.
beat the snot out of the Cavs. And I think for the Knicks, it's like, I'm a big hoops head. And I think for the Knicks, that the problem is like Brunson and Towns are like destructive players for the other team. So, other team's defense, but they're also kind of destructive players for their own defense. And I think part of the problem was like the Pacers and Rick Carlisle, who coaches the Pacers, I think is highly underrated.
Yeah, I
Um,
agree.
and I just think like I think the Pacers just play with such a weird like they play a very it's so high octane, but they were ruthless in attacking Brunson and Towns. And I think that was kind of the problem for the Knicks was just like if you take those guys off the floor, like you saw moments like I can't remember what it was game 3 or game 4 when Brunson had to sit out for like 9 minutes because he had like his fifth foul where he sat
Game
out 9 minutes or whatever it was. And the Nick, they had DeLon Wright and Landry Shaman on the floor. And
Mhm.
like there was no place for the Pacers to attack suddenly. I just that Pacers team is really good. I mean, I'm a big Siakam fan
Oh,
because
I'll
he
give
won a
him, yeah.
title in Toronto. But I agree with you. I mean, I think the Thunder when the Thunder beat the Nuggets in Game 7 this year, I was like, I think that's the moment. I think that's there because like that's Jokic, that's a battle hardened team, and the Thunder were like, the Nuggets were beaten up and broken down. They had like 5.5 healthy players, but like that's where I was like, last year was a bit of an aberration for the Nuggets. This year, that was the real Nuggets team. Like that's a championship DNA team. And if the
Mhm.
Nuggets had won that game, I probably would have taken them to go all
Same.
the way through. But and on the MJ LeBron, the only thing I'm going to say, I'll say two things. First one is I want second choice. I don't care who you take first, whether it's MJ or LeBron. I want to pick second because I want the other guy with a chip on his shoulder because like MJ with chip on his shoulder, I think that's not good for anybody.
Yeah.
I don't think LeBron with a chip on his shoulder is good for anybody either. And my second point is, I'm not even sure if I think LeBron's had an incredible career. I
Mhm.
don't think anybody's wrong for saying that MJ is the greatest of all time. The only thing that bugs me is there's a certain brand of MJ fan who's like, it's not even a discussion. And I'm like, that's a little disrespectful. If you want to say to me, I think Jordan's 6 titles and everything he's done is just makes him the greatest, I think that's totally fine. But it should then the next sentence should be, and LeBron has had an incredible career. If there's anybody who could challenge MJ, it would be LeBron. But for me, it's not because MJ's got the 6 rings. He never lost. And you know, that's the only thing. I get a little agitated when people just dismiss LeBron. I'm like, please, come on. The guy has had the greatest career in the history
Yeah.
of basketball. Is he
Well,
the best player? Maybe not.
See, the one thing I have with LeBron though is the fact that he had to do the super team. Like that's what he ushered in. So I'm not saying he's not a great player, but
What Scottie Pippen and like Michael just got a super team. They drafted and put a super team around him, and then they cropped on the guy who did it.
well. But the Bulls drafted
They're like,
well.
oh, Jerry Krause, we hate you. Yeah,
Well,
look,
like I say,
look what LeBron had. He had Vildrautis, Ilgauskas, Bimbo Coles, and me.
yeah, I was gonna say he had to go get his team, but like I say,
Yeah, because the Cleveland was never going to draft him a team the way Chicago drafted Jordan.
no, until he came back. Until he came back because they were so bad that they loaded up on #1 picks. I mean, I think the only one that didn't work out for him was what, Anthony Bennett?
Yeah, no, Anthony Bennett did not work out.
Yeah, I was gonna say I can't remember
He did
every
not
number
work out.
every
He did
number
not
one
work
they took there. Yeah, he didn't.
But even that, like I think like when he went back, I was talking about this with a friend of mine, and like, and you look at it like, Kyrie Irving is obviously like in terms of just raw talent, he's probably one of the like on ball, one of the best in the history of the game.
Yeah.
But you look at his history and you're like, he won with LeBron, and he hasn't done much else anywhere else in his career. And Kevin Love, like he came and he was the perfect third guy there. But like his career, if he had never gone to Cleveland, his career would have been like, oh, one of the great talent, one of the great numbers stuffing guys who never won nothing. And so I do think like in retrospect, you're like, oh, LeBron and Kyrie and Kevin Love, what a super team. But at the moment, like when it happened, like people are like, yeah, Kyrie's super talented, but he's a head case, and the Cavs have been horrible with him trying to lead them.
Mhm.
And you're bringing the best player from a team that's made the playoffs once in his career in Kevin Love. Like, I don't think it was. Now looking back, you're like, oh yeah, that was a super team. But when it happened, I don't think people were like, oh well, that's no doubt that's the best team in the NBA. I think that's LeBron. There's an interesting thing I looked the other day. So Jordan didn't win a playoff series till he was 25,
Mhm.
and he won his first title at 28. LeBron won his first playoff series at 22, and he made the finals when he was 22, and he won his first finals at 27. And my thing for LeBron is, I think unfortunately for LeBron, two things happened. One, he was so good, so young, because he's so good at like bringing everybody in. Jordan was an amazing player, but he needed those years to learn, I got to trust the rest of my team. And once Jordan did that, he was unstoppable because he was the single most destructive force that basketball has ever seen. Right. It's, he doesn't get enough credit for, hey, I passed the ball to Steve Kerr. I passed the ball to John Paxson. But like, I think LeBron's problem is he was so good at making his teammates better that he took these god awful Cleveland teams. And then the second thing that hurt him was the East was so crappy. So he could take these god awful Cleveland teams, and he brought, at 22, he brought a horrible Cleveland team to the finals where the Spurs just annihilated them. Because, it's kind of like what happened to Michaels. He kept running into Detroit early.
And you couldn't get
Except
over
Detroit was in his own conference. They beat the crap out of him because Detroit was way better. And I think LeBron, some of the he can't win is based on the fact that he actually won a ton, and then he took these very mediocre teams, and then the really good teams were waiting for him from the West, and they're like, oh, it's cute. This 22-year-old kid brought Zildjius Ilgauskas and, freaking Delonte West to the finals. Here's your gift bag.
Oh yeah, no, that was his miracle run there. I mean, but like I say, when he went to Miami, like I say, just of how he handled it there. That's where
that was bad.
That's where I kind of go when I say the super team, because like you had to go there. You get with Wade, you get with Bosch. You literally had no bench, and it was literally if you three were on point that night, you were winning the game. If
Don't forget Joel Anthony, Canada's own.
Oh, that's true. See, I even forget who's on the bench. Like I was gonna say, like I know like Ray Allen was there because I remember every single fan was leaving the building there when the Spurs were up there, and then he decided to
Yeah.
drain the game winning three, and then everybody was trying to run back in the building. But it was just like in those moments, like I say, just for what Jordan did with those teams. But the problem is that I think a lot of fans don't get is it's different eras, and
Thank you.
Yes.
this era of
Yes.
NBA is not as physical as it was in that 90s, early 2000s one. And it's a different one where the emphasis is more on like ISO and getting more, three-pointers going. Like it's a different factor. Like where LeBron was great is, yeah, he facilitated a lot for those teams. But as you touched upon, when he was drafted into the East was a big pile of hot garbage. It was just it was like you
Yep.
take a look at the team. It's just like, okay, who's going to be runner up to the West because the West was so loaded. So to
Yes.
see what
It's
he
like where
did
we
there.
are now.
Yeah, no, I mean legitimately because the Knicks are now kind of thriving. Boston pre-Tatum injury was very, very good. Milwaukee, I mean that kind of went up in smoke is not as bad as the Sixers because, well, yeah,
It's
Philly's
the
just
Sixers, dude. I haven't followed the Sixers since 2000. So put
you
that in
don't
Oh
worry,
man, the
they're still
Sixers one
trusting the
is tough.
process.
The Sixers one is tough, man. That's like you're gonna look at Joel Embiid and it's just like how man a guy like you know when you're that big and you're that athletic, your body's gonna break down, right?
Yeah.
Like guys who are that big, they're either like the Gasol brothers who don't jump and so they can last forever, or
Mhm.
they're like that's why I'm like Wembanyama or a guy like Chet Holmgren might make it because like the really slim guys like Durant, he's seven whatever
Right.
like they don't do it like they just don't do as much damage when they're jumping because they're not as dense. Where you looked at Embiid and you're just like, his peak is going to be incredible, but he's going to have a very short window. And the problem, unfortunately, I think for the Sixers was Embiid just. I think he gets a bit of an unfair rap in terms of like he doesn't take it seriously. I think he takes it a lot more seriously now, but he's always a bit of a goofy guy, and
Mhm.
it did take him a few years in his career to kind of take it as seriously as he needed to. And in retrospect, those were probably the years he could have won. And now you're just like, I don't know, man. Are we ever going to see him play more than 35 games in a season again?
Yeah, see, sadly, no. Sadly, I think that window is closed on them. And as bad as it sounds, like I think for Philly, they just got to hit the reset button and just tear that whole team apart. See what they can do.
See,
Dump.
I mean, the insane one is would you trade Embiid to these Pelicans for Zion? Because Zion's contract is is fully non-guaranteed.
Yeah.
So you could trade for Zion and then just cut him and you wouldn't owe him any money. Now I don't know why the Pels would do that because I think given what just happened with Zion and all the horrible things that he's been accused of,
Yep.
I think the Pelicans might want to keep that button for themselves. Just be like, we're just going to take that money off our cap space and like do something else. But yeah, man, like sorry Tom, but yeah, that Sixers position is. I know you don't care about them really,
I,
but still,
I'm surprised
they're
they
they're
still have a
still in your
freaking team.
town.
Yeah.
I'm just surprised they're still a team.
Yeah. See, I think if there's some team like maybe in Orlando to pair him with Paulo, maybe that's somewhere they might want to try sending him if the money gets right. But I'm with you. Like, I
Maybe
just don't know.
maybe Phoenix.
Well, Phoenix, yeah. I mean,
Phoenix trades the Bradley Beal contract. They're getting the better. Maybe like maybe Phoenix wants to give a could Embiid, Durant, and Booker work, and we'll just like I mean it's not going to, but I can see why you're like maybe we get the outs at the end of the season. Embiid is healthy. I mean, again I don't, but I mean I guess you're not in any worse shape if you have Embiid versus Bradley Beal. Like
exactly.
I
Like I
don't
said,
know. That's the only team I can think of.
yeah, because I mean, it's just with moving the money there. I mean, that's the thing, and especially what Phoenix is doing. I mean, they're trying to get rid of everybody on that team right now except Booker, which I mean, that's a smart move. If you're going to keep anybody, you got to keep Booker. But then again, he's going to want to get out of there too because he's got no help and he knows he can't win in that West. I just don't know where like you ultimately wind up going there. Like I think Phoenix has got one of the worst situations going on. I think most of the Western, I mean, the Lakers. I mean, even though they got Luca. I don't know if they can really make some moves because there's a lot of money tied up in bad contracts. So, I mean, if they can get LeBron some help, sure, they could try making a late run there. But even he's now at that, he's got probably one more season left, I would imagine, just because Father Time catches up with him there.
Although it's not catching up to him very much. I mean, it's incredible. You look at the numbers he put up as a 40-year-old, and you're like, are you freaking kidding me? Like, this is why I'm like, regardless of who the best player is, and you guys made the all different eras is the perfect answer for that. But in terms of like an overall career, just like no, like it's him or I guess Wilt Chamberlain in terms of guys who are this good or Kareem, I guess
Yeah,
guys who are this good. Like it's
I was gonna say
insane. But
Kareem.
maybe if LeBron took less, if LeBron agreed to take less in LA, then that would give them a little more room. But I think they're so far over whatever I never understand the NBA's level. But even if he takes basically half the money, I think they're still over the whatever, which apron limits them for. I wouldn't like to be a Sacramento King fan again right now, because I feel like the Kings are going to be stuck in the bottom of that West for a while. I think the Suns are going to be at the very bottom for a while. I'm happy to see that the Utah Jazz will probably be there, just because I thought the Jazz tanking was so, like, as a Raptors fan, you're kind of keeping an eye on, and you're like, what the hell? Lauri Markkanen's not playing again? Like, oh, well, Walker Kessler, oh, he's back from his injury. Great. Then you're like, oh, no, he needs to rest. You're like, he's 23. What do you mean he needs to? They were so naked. Like, anytime they played a bad team, any of their half-decent players were like, oh, like my shoulder. I was just like, good. I'm glad you didn't. I'm not sure if Cooper Flag going to the Mavericks is the choice I would have made. I don't think that's the key. If I've been a basketball god, but
I don't know. There's gonna be a lot of question marks going on this offseason after it gets done. I mean, like I say, I think Oklahoma City's got this one locked, but this offseason is gonna be just I don't even know like how the league is gonna look with how much moving and shaking they're gonna do, especially if they wind up moving Giannis, if they wind up moving Durant, who winds up where. I mean, if everybody got loaded up in the East, I think that would create a little more parity, but I just don't see a lot of those players wanting to go there. I think they want to stay in the West. And then especially if Oklahoma City and San Antonio, who are loaded with draft picks, want to make some moves too. Like, they're the ultimate X factors. Because even if, like, hypothetically saying they wanted to do, Oklahoma City could do enough draft picks with Milwaukee to get Giannis there. And if you pair Giannis with SGA, I don't even want to watch next season. I'm just like, who's going to beat him?
I mean, I think it's weird. We've all kind of underrated Giannis somehow, like, just because, like, Jokic exists in this world and he's so amazing, and the Bucks have been, I guess, disappointing overall. But yeah, it's like, if somehow Milwaukee could get Booker, that would be incredible. But I don't see how they could do. I mean, the problem is the teams where you'd be like, oh, Booker would be the most interesting. None of them have the future assets that Phoenix. It's like Brooklyn could take him, but I mean, I don't know if that makes sense yet for Brooklyn.
Yeah.
The Knicks don't have the assets now. Like, I don't know. I'm not sure. Like, I mean, Indiana could probably do something, but I don't think they want to mess with what they've got. So,
yeah, I think they stay that put.
Yeah, it's going to be very interesting.
It's going to be absolutely wild about that, which, it'll be fun to talk about that. So I know we're running short on time, so we're definitely going to have you come back on and talk some sports. And we're also going to have you come back on and talk after the last which wraps up, because we definitely want to make sure everybody is going to the comic shops, picking up Blood and Betrayal #1, June 18th. Make sure you get down there. And in the meantime, go get the trade paperback of Volume 1. You don't want to miss this. Connor, thank you so much for taking the time out to talk to us about all the books. We'll definitely have to have you back on and catch up.
Thanks so much, guys. I really appreciate it. It was a great interview.
Thank you. And on behalf of Tom and myself, we'll end it like we always do on Turn a Page. When you're at the comic shops and you have a great issue in your hands, such as The Last Witch, Blood and Betrayal #1 by Boom Studios, and you see somebody struggling to find something, hand yours off to them. Tell them Turn a Page. We'll see you next time.
I'm out.
It's such wasted time, swiping left and swiping right on people you could know. 'Cause anyone who's worth a damn be worth way more than a picture could ever show. You could find the right light, find the right angle, and never find your soul. And it can feel like a losing battle, and this plot is full of holes. This modern way of finding love just makes me feel so alone. And I can't be the only one sick of staring at my phone. So look up, talk to me, a better way to spend our energy. Just look up, talk to me. We don't have to float alone on the open sea. Don't know that I believe in the old time fable. Everyone has just one true love. All God knows you're across this table, and you're all I'm thinking of. So look up, talk to me, a better way to spend our energy. Just look up, talk to me. We don't have to float alone on the open sea. Talk to me. Talk to me. It's such waste of time, swiping left and swiping right on people you could know. Whoa.